Ch.12 Red-Clad Ghost, burning of the martial and civil temples. On the face of the boy, as Xie Lian had first suspected, there was a field of serious burn scars. Except, beneath the bloody scars, there were traces of 3 to 4 tiny faces. Those faces were no bigger than the palms of a baby, and they were scattered crookedly across his cheeks and forehead. After being burnt, the features on each tiny face were shriveling in pain, as if screaming in agony. The sight of these weird, screaming faces squeezing and squirming on a regular human face was indeed more horrifying than any demon. Xie Lian felt as though he was plunged into a nightmare the instant he saw this boy's face. A fear so immense paralyzed him until he couldn't recall standing up, nor tell what the expression on his face was. But it must have been intimidating. The boy was already on tenterhooks as he slowly removed his bandages. After seeing Xie Lian's reaction, he took a couple steps back, as if aware of Xie Lian's inability to accept this face of his. He suddenly covered that horrifying face and leapt up from the ground. Then he let out a shout and fled into the deep woods. Xie Lian finally came around and shouted, "Wait." He called out as he chased after him, "Wait. Come back." But Xie Lian was dumbstruck for a good moment before he came around after all. The boy was obviously familiar with the mountain paths, and he was used to escaping in the dark, so it took him no time to vanish completely. No matter how Xie Lian yelled for him, he wouldn't show himself. There was no one around to help Xie Lian search, and his powers were exhausted, so there was no way he could contact the others. He ran all over the mountain, searching for a good part of the hour to no avail. A cold breeze blew past and cleared his mind a little. Knowing that running around aimlessly like a headless fly served no purpose, Xie Lian forced himself to calm down. Maybe he'll go back to take Xiao Ying's body, Xie Lian thought as he returned to the Mingguang temple. But then, he stopped in his steps. Many men dressed in black, with grave expressions, had gathered in the woods at the back of the temple. And they were in the midst of carefully unloading those 40-something upside-down corpses. A tall man, with folded arms before the woods, was overseeing the operation. When he turned his head around, it was the exquisite but cold face of a youth. It was Fu Yao. It looked like he had made a trip back and brought along a number of helping hands from the palace of Xuanzhen. Xie Lian was about to speak, but was interrupted by the sound of footfalls behind him. Nan Feng had returned from sending the villagers away. On seeing the situation, Nan Feng glanced at Fu Yao and said, "Didn't you run away?" Displeased, Fu Yao raised his eyebrows at the offensive comment. Xie Lian didn't want another argument to start, so he said, "I asked him to find reinforcements." Nan Feng sneered. "Well, where are they?" "I thought you could at least ask your general to come." Fu Yao replied mildly, "When I went back, I heard General Pei Jr. had already come to the scene, so I didn't bother our general. Even if I did, he's probably too busy to come anyway." Actually, based on Xie Lian's understanding of Mu King, Xie Lian was pretty sure that he wouldn't come, even if he had the time. But under the present circumstances, he was too tired to care. "Please stop fighting for a moment and help me find the bandaged boy." Nan Feng frowned. "Wasn't he with you, guarding that girl's body?" "I scared him off after asking him to remove his bandages," Xie Lian replied. Fu Yao smirked. Please, your cross-dressing isn't that terrifying. Xie Lian sighed. It's all my fault for being in a stupor. Lady Xiao Ying's death was already a big shock to him. He probably couldn't take the blow at thinking that I was scared of his face, so he ran off. Fu Yao wrinkled his nose. Is he really that ugly? Xie Lian replied, it's not a matter of ugliness. He has the human face disease. Hearing those 3 words, both Nanfang and Fu Yao froze. They finally understood why Xie Lian was shocked. 800 years ago, a plague swept through the kingdom of Xianlei, and it wiped out the nation. Those who caught the plague would first have small warts develop all over their bodies, then as the warts swelled, the skin would grow rugged. That swollen part would slowly become uneven, with 3 indentations and 1 protrusion, just like eyes, mouths, noses. The facial features would then metamorphose until it eventually took on the shape of a human face. If they let it be, then more and more human faces would grow on their bodies. It was said that some of these human faces, once fully formed, could speak and even scream. They called this the human face disease. Fu Yao's expression went through a myriad of changes as he put down his folded arms. That's impossible. That thing was extinguished hundreds of years ago. There's no way it can reappear. I'm not mistaken, Xie Lian only said. Nanfang and Fu Yao couldn't refute. No one could refute this if it came from Xie Lian. Xie Lian continued, there are many burn scars on his face, probably from self-induced burning to get rid of the faces. The first reaction of those who contracted the disease was usually to slice off the faces with knives, or burn them off with fire, any means possible to rid themselves of those faces. Nanfang dropped his voice. The boy is probably not a normal human being, then he has to be at least a few hundred years old. Everything else aside, is he contagious? Even though this was a severe headache, it was a question Xie Lian considered calmly and logically. So he said with conviction, no. The human face disease is highly contagious. If he was still contagious, then the entire mountain would have been infected by now, considering how long he had been hiding here. His condition should already be cured. Only the scars remain. They couldn't afford to be careless. Fu Yao seemed to have some real influence in the palace of Xuan Zhen, and was able to call forth capable hands to help with the search. But no matter how deep they dug, or how far they looked, they could not find any traces of the bandaged boy. Perhaps he had already fled Mount Yujun and vanished into the sea of people. The best they could do now was to return to the heavens and request the palace of Lingwen conduct a search, and wait for news. Fortunately, the boy was not contagious, but Xie Lian thought of how horrifying the boy looked if he was discovered after he left the mountains. He might end up hunted as a monster. They must find him soon. Without further delay, Xie Lian picked up Xiao Ying's body and descended the mountain. Since he was slightly out of it, he didn't realize he brought the body into the tea shop until the tea master yelled at him. Xie Lian immediately apologized and went back out to entrust Xiao Ying's burial to someone else before re-entering the tea shop. After settling everything, he sat down and heaved a soundless sigh. This case was finally over, but Xie Lian thought that the few days since he ascended felt longer than an entire year of him collecting junk in the mortal realm. Climbing, jumping, flying, screaming, tumbling, disguising and performing, his bones were going to collapse. Even then, there were still many mysteries and aftermath left behind for him to deal with. Maybe he'd raise a barred banner and roam the world, telling tales of how collecting junk was better than ascension. Fu Yao lifted the hem of his robe and sat down next to him. Alas, he could no longer keep it in, and rolled his eyes. How much longer are you gonna wear that thing? It felt incredibly familiar to see his eyes roll. Xie Lian finally took off the wedding dress, wiped away his makeup, then realized dejectedly, was I talking to General Pei Jr. in this dress the whole time? Nan Fang, why didn't you remind me? Probably because you looked so happy in it, Fu Yao replied. After running errands all day, Nan Feng finally sat down for a rest too. Don't worry about it. General Pei Jr. won't care. You can dress 10 times weirder and he won't bat an eyelash or tell anyone. Xie Lian was grateful for all the errands Nan Feng ran and poured him some tea. He thought about how cool-headed General Pei Jr. was in the face of Xuanji's madness. He commented, General Pei Jr. is certainly calm and collected, very composed. Nan Feng took a sip of the tea and said, he may look well-mannered, but he's like his ancestors, difficult to deal with. Xie Lian could see it. Unbelievably enough, Fu Yao agreed too. General Pei Jr. is a nouveau ascendant of the last couple hundred years, but he's got a strong tailwind, and climbs the ladder pretty fast. When he was appointed Deputy General by General Pei, he was barely 20 years old. Do you know what he did? What? Xie Lian asked. He sorted an entire city, Fu Yao replied coolly. Xie Lian looked thoughtful on hearing this, but he wasn't surprised. In the heavenly court, kings and generals roamed. The whole fighting for and protecting of one's land was nothing less than heroic, and to ascend, one must first become a hero. However, the path of a hero was always bloody. Fu Yao concluded, in the heavenly court, there aren't many who are trustworthy and worth meeting. Xie Lian thought it funny that Fu Yao seemed to speak from experience. He probably got bullied all over the place. But then again, even though Xie Lian ascended 3 times, he didn't stick around for long, so when it came to understanding these gods, he might actually know less than these 2 junior officials. Nan Feng, on the other hand, seemed to strongly disagree. Don't listen to such inflammatory statements. There's good and bad everywhere. There are still a number of trustworthy officials in the heavens. Ha! Trustworthy officials? Do you mean your general? Fu Yao sneered. Nan Feng responded, I don't know about my general, but it's definitely not yours. Xie Lian was long used to this kind of situation. And with other things on his mind, he didn't have the energy to pull them apart. The case in the north had concluded. Xie Lian returned to the heavens, reported that bandaged boy to the palace of Ling Wen, and placed a request to search for him. Ling Wen took the request with a grave expression and said, I will do my utmost to find him. Truly I did not think this journey to the north would open a giant can of worms. Thank you for your hard work, Your Highness. Xie Lian replied, I have the 2 junior officials who volunteered to help to thank, and General Pei Jr. as well. I am truly grateful. All this is bad relationship trouble caused by All Pei himself. Of course Junior has to take care of it. He's used to it, so there's no need to thank him, Ling Wen said. If your Highness is not busy, please enter the communication array. We are to have a meeting over what has transpired. Xie Lian also had many questions he'd like answers to. After leaving the palace of Ling Wen, he wandered about and found a small stone bridge. The stone bridge crossed a small gurgling stream with crystal clear waters. He could see the clouds drifting under the water, and through the flowing waters and clouds there stood the mountains and cities of the mortal realm. This is a good place, Xie Lian thought. And so he sat on the head of the bridge, mouthed the password, and entered the communication array. It was one of those rare times when the communication array was bursting with liveliness, with voices echoing and reverberating from all directions. The first thing he heard was Feng Xin swearing. Holy fuck. Have you all picked a mountain for the ceiling yet? Exclamation mark. That Xuanji is a madwoman, no matter what we ask, she only screams to see General Pei and tells us nothing useful about the location of the green ghost Qi Rong. General Pei Jr. responded, General Xuanji has always been stubborn and intense. Feng Xin yelled angrily, General Pei Jr., is your General Pei back yet? Let her meet him. Then get Green Ghost's location out of her and get rid of her. Feng Xin had never been good with women, and Xie Lian felt sorry that he was the one given the task of interrogation. General Pei Jr. replied, it doesn't matter even if they meet. She'll just become more insane. A voice came through, another round of upside-down corpses, Qi Rong really is too crass. Disgusting. Even the ghost realm thinks he's vulgar. He's truly the most asinine. Words between the officials flew seamlessly around in the array. It was clear that they were all on familiar terms with one another. As a newcomer who'd only just ascended again after an 800-year absence, Xie Lian should have laid low and remained silent, but after a while, Xie Lian still couldn't hold it in. He asked everyone what was with the upside-down corpses. Was the green ghost Qi Rong in the area? 2. Xie Lian rarely spoke in the communication array, so his voice was foreign to many, and the officials did not know whether to respond. Surprisingly enough, the first to answer him was Feng Xin. The green ghost Qi Rong wasn't at Mount Yujun. However, the upside-down corpses were offerings Xuanji presented to him, as per his order. Xuanji is a subordinate of the green ghost. Xie Lian asked. Correct, General Pei Jr. replied. Xuanji passed away many hundreds of years ago. She held a grudge but was too powerless to raise hell until just over 100 years ago, when the green ghost Qi Rong took a liking to her and took her under his wing. Only then did her spiritual powers improve by leaps and bounds. What he really meant was the chaos Xuanji caused was not General Pei's fault, because she wasn't originally this strong. All blame should go to the green ghost Qi Rong instead, since he was the one who took her under his command and gave her the power to harm humans. Everyone was already of the opinion that this sin was all General Pei's to bear, but no one said it out loud. Yet he noticed, and spoke of, it so openly in a reminder that it shut everyone up and made them hide their real thoughts deeper within. Xie Lian then spoke up again. Has Mount Yujun been thoroughly inspected? What about the child spirit? This time, Mu Qin's voice rang out. He said in an indecipherable tone, child spirit. What child spirit? Xie Lian thought Fu Yao had probably not reported every detail. Maybe his volunteering to help was even done in secret. So, without mentioning Fu Yao to spare him any unnecessary problems, Xie Lian explained. When I was in the wedding sedan, I heard the giggles of a child who sang nursery rhymes as a word of caution. The two junior officials next to me didn't notice, which means that this child spirit must have remarkable powers. There were no child spirits found on Mount Yujun, Mu King stated. Xie Lian was confused. Perhaps the child spirit had specially come just to warn him. Thinking of this, Xie Lian was suddenly reminded of another matter that had been on his mind all this time. He asked, speaking of which, I met a young man who can control silver butterflies at Mount Yujun. Does anyone know who he is? The noisy communication array suddenly fell completely silent. Xie Lian was expecting this reaction, so he simply waited. A moment later, Ling Wen asked, Your Highness, what did you say just now? Mu King said coldly, he just said, he met Hua Cheng. Upon finally learning the name of that young man in red, Xie Lian felt his spirits lift inexplicably. He smiled. So he's called Hua Cheng. It's a fitting name for him. The tone of Xie Lian's voice rendered all the officials even more speechless. Another moment passed before Ling Wen cleared her throat. Your Highness, have you ever heard of the four calamities? Much ashamed, I only know of the four famous tales, Xie Lian thought to himself. The so-called four famous tales referred to the extravagant stories of the deeds of four gods prior to their ascension, the young lord who poured wine, the prince who pleased God, the general who snapped his sword, and the princess who slit her throat. Of course, the prince who pleased God alluded to the martial might of the crown prince of Xianlei. Being ranked as the four famous tales did not necessarily indicate the four were the strongest of the gods, it was simply because their tales were the most well-known and most talked about. Xie Lian had always been slow on the uptake when it came to news from the outside world. He could even be said to be out of touch with the outside world, and ignorant of the state of affairs. He had only known about the four famous tales because he was one of the four. The four calamities was something that probably grew popular later, but Xie Lian had never heard of it before. Since it included the word calamity, it couldn't be anything good. Much ashamed, but I've never heard of them. Who are the four calamities? Mu King said coolly, Your Highness walked the mortal realm for hundreds of years, and yet you are so ill-informed. I'm really curious to know what you've been doing all this time. Eating, sleeping, busking, collecting junk, duh. Xie Lian smiled. It's not easy being mortal. There's plenty of things to busy myself with, and they're all complicated. It's not easier than being a heavenly official. Ling Wen spoke up, Please remember, Your Highness, the four calamities are ship sinking black water, night touring green lantern, white clothed calamity, and crimson rain sought flower. They are the four ghost kings of the ghost realm, causing endless headaches to all in the heavenly realm. Humans become gods when they ascend, ghosts when they fall. The gods created heaven to reside in, drawing a clear boundary between themselves and mortals. They watched from above and ruled from beyond reach. The ghost realm, on the other hand, was not separated from the mortal realm. Monsters, demons, ghosts, and mortals shared one earth. Some ghosts hid in the darkness, and some pretended to be humans as they walked among the people and roamed the mortal realm in disguise. Ling Wen continued, ship-sinking black water refers to a water ghoul. Although he has reached supreme status, he's fairly low-key and rarely starts trouble. Not many have seen him before, so we won't mind him for now. Night touring Green Lantern refers to that vulgar corpse hanging green ghost Xi Rong. He's the only one in the four not yet a supreme. He's probably included because he's always causing trouble and is really quite annoying. Or maybe because four names are easier to remember, so he's just there to pad the numbers. He's also insignificant. White-clothed Calamity should be someone your Highness is familiar with. He's also known as White No-Face. Hearing the name, Xie Lian, who was sitting on the stone bridge, suddenly felt a stab of pain in his heart that spread all over his body. His hands began to shake, and he unconsciously folded them into fists. Of course he was familiar. They say when a supreme was born, it could destroy an entire nation and throw the world into chaos. The first country White No-Face destroyed was Xianlei. Xie Lian remained silent and Ling Wen continued. Anyway, White No-Face is already defeated. Even if he still exists somewhere in this world, he'd be the last person anyone would expect to steal the limelight. Your Highness, the silver butterflies you saw at Mount Yujun are also called wraith butterflies. Their master is the last of the four, and one the world does not want to incur the wrath of Crimson Rain Sword. Flower Hua Cheng. In the heavens, notoriety is the word to describe the heavenly martial emperor and the crown prince of Xianlei. Although the meaning of notoriety was completely different for the two, the word still resonated equally. However, in the ghost realm, there was only one worthy to be called notorious, and that was Hua Cheng. If you wanted to learn about a god, simply walk into his temple and take a look at the way he was dressed and the weapons he wielded, and you'd more or less understand him. If you wanted to know more, simply listen to folktales, plays, and stories passed down by word of mouth. The gods' mortal past and deeds were well documented. Ghosts, on the other hand, not so much. The kind of person they were while still alive, and their appearance at present were all a mystery. The name Hua Cheng was very obviously fake, and his appearance was most likely fake too. In the rumors, he was sometimes a twisted boy given to capricious mood changes, sometimes a gentle and elegant, handsome young man, and sometimes a gorgeous seductress with a vicious, deceptive heart. Anything goes. As for his true self, the only thing one could be sure of was that he dressed in red, and often appeared during a bloodbath with silver butterflies questing between his sleeves. And when it came to Hua Cheng's backstory, there were endless different versions. Some say he was born crippled without a right eye and was bullied and humiliated since birth, so he was filled with hatred for the world. Some say he was a young soldier who died in a lost battle for his country, and later came to walk the earth in resentment. Some say he was a fool who was tormented by the death of his loved. Some even say he was a monster. In the most outrageous version, supposedly, only supposedly, Hua Cheng ascended and became a god, but immediately jumped back down on his own and became a ghost. But this was merely a version that wasn't widespread. No one knew if it was true or false, and not many believed it. It had to be false, though. Even if it was true, it'd be a complete embarrassment for the heavens that someone would rather ditch the heavenly official role to become a ghost. Either way, the more diverse the stories were, the more mystery he was shrouded in. There were also many reasons for the gods to fear Hua Cheng. For example, his behavior was unpredictable. Sometimes he would carry out a massacre in cold blood, and sometimes he would do odd acts of kindness. He also wielded a great deal of influence in the mortal realm and had legions of followers. That's right. Mortals worshipped gods to ask for blessings and protection so that they could escape the evils from the ghost realm, and this was how the gods came to gain plenty of followers. Yet Hua Cheng, a ghost, had such a large following on Earth that he could influence the world single-handedly. Here was a story that must be told. When Hua Cheng first appeared, he did something notorious. He openly challenged 35 heavenly officials. The challenge was to spar with the martial gods and debate with the civil gods. 33 of the 35 thought it hilarious, but were also infuriated enough to take up his challenge, thinking they could join forces to teach this little devil a thing or two. The first to step up to the plate were the martial gods. The martial gods were the strongest of the heavenly officials. Each had plenty of believers, and they were all powerful. In the face of a newborn ghost, it was a sure win. Instead, it turned out to be a complete annihilation. Even their weapons were completely smashed into pieces by Hua Cheng's freakish scimitar. It was only after the battle that they found out Hua Cheng was born of Mount Tonglu. 13. Mount Tonglu was a volcano. What was significant was that there is a city in the mountains, called Gu. 14. The city of Gu wasn't a place where people cultivated poison, but rather, the city itself was a great venom. Every few hundred years, tens of thousands of ghosts descended upon the city of Gu to butcher one another until at last only one remained, and thus formed the venom. It usually ended in complete elimination, but those who were capable enough to make it out alive would emerge as ghost kings. Only 2 such ghosts have ever made it out of the city of Gu these few hundreds of years, and as expected, these 2 both became the well-known calamities. Hua Cheng was such a ghost king. After the defeat of the martial gods, it came time for the civil gods to rise to the challenge. Surely Hua Cheng could fight, but not debate. Unfortunately for the civil gods, they could not defeat him. Hua Cheng could recite the classics and debate the moderns. He was sometimes polite, sometimes vicious, sometimes stubborn, sometimes incisive, and sometimes quibbling. He was truly a great speaker of sophistication and bullshit. He verbally abused the civil gods from top to bottom, past to present, and infuriated them so much that the waterfall of blood they coughed out washed the skies red. Hua Cheng gained fame overnight. What was truly frightening, however, was that after the challenge, Hua Cheng demanded all 33 officials make good on their word. Before the challenge, it was decided that if Hua Cheng were to lose, he would offer up his own ashes. If the officials were to lose, they must descend from the heavens and return to being mortals. If it wasn't for his arrogant attitude and his decisive stake, and the conviction of the 33 officials that they would not lose, they would never have accepted such terms. In the end, all 33 gods ate their own words, and no one honored the terms. It was humiliating to break their promises, but when they thought about it, if only one of them was defeated, it'd be an embarrassment. If all of them were defeated and humiliated, then no one would lose face. They could even turn around and mock the other party. So they all came to a tacit understanding to pretend that nothing had happened. Mortals were forgetful anyway. They would forget this in 50 years or so. They were not wrong about the mortals, but they were wrong about Hua Cheng. The gods refused to fulfill their promises. That was fine, he would give them a hand. So, Hua Cheng burnt every single temple and shrine of all 33 gods. This was the stuff of nightmares for all the gods in the heavens, the red-clad ghosts burning of the 33 martial and civil gods' temples. Temples and followers were the main source of power for heavenly officials. Where would followers go to pray if there were no temples? If they didn't pray, there wouldn't be merits. The massive loss of temples and merits greatly crippled the heavens. To rebuild would take at least 100 years, and even then it wouldn't be the same as before. This was a catastrophe greater than passing one's own predetermined heavenly calamity. 15. The number of temples and shrines of these heavenly officials combined were at least tens of thousands, but Hua Cheng managed to burn them all in one night. How? No one knew, but he did it. He was truly insane. The gods cried foul to the heavenly martial emperor, but there was nothing he could do. The heavenly officials themselves accepted the challenge and the terms, and Hua Cheng was cunning enough to only destroy temples without hurting anyone. It was like he dug a hole and asked the gods to jump, and the gods themselves dug the hole bigger and dove in. So what could they have done, the way things were now? Originally, the 33 heavenly officials wanted to show the world the defeat of this insignificant devil, so they broadcasted the challenge in the dreams of many royals and nobles to display their strength and might before their most devout believers. But all the royalties and nobles saw was their miserable defeat. When the mortals woke up, they swapped from worshipping the heavenly officials to the ghost king. The heavenly officials who lost both their temples and believers soon grew weaker and weaker, until they were erased from existence. It wasn't until a new wave of ascensions that those empty positions were filled up again. Ever since then, the name Hua Cheng was feared in the heavens. Even just hearing any mention of red robes or silver butterflies brought cold sweat to many. Some feared he would challenge them, then burn their temples if they were to incur his displeasure. Some were blackmailed into silence and inaction because he had them by the balls, and some even oddly respected him because of how wide his reach was in the mortal realm. Sometimes, they even had to ask him for help in paving the way for them while they carried out the duties. Thus, the heavens feared, hated, and respected this ghost king. Among the 35 gods who were challenged, the two who declined were General Xuan Zhen, New King, and General Nan Yang, Feng Xin. They thought the challenge was beneath them and didn't care for it. Turns out, it was the right decision to make. But even then, poor Cheng hadn't forgotten about those two. Many Jungyuan festival, 16 patrols, ended in fists and blood when both parties crossed paths with each other, and those crazy, maniacal silver butterflies left an everlasting impression on both men. Hearing this, Xie Lian thought of those fluttering silver butterflies that danced around him playfully. He couldn't picture them as described in the rumors. Are they really that scary? Xie Lian wondered. Aren't they rather precious? 13 Tonglu means copper kiln, so Mount Tonglu is basically a giant furnace. 14 Gu means venom. 15 gods have predetermined heavenly calamities that they must endure and overcome every so often if they want to level up. It usually involves hella lightning strikes or descending into the mortal realm to live one lifetime as a mortal, but it varies. 16 Jungyuan Ga Jungyuan Ji, or the Ghost Festival, falls on the 15th day of the 7th month of the lunar calendar. This usually falls around August, September on the Western calendar. The 7th month is Ghost Month, when the gates to the underworld are open, so the gods patrol more diligently. The festival celebrates the underworld, and offerings are made to the dead to appease their spirits and help them move on.